Hey everybody, it's Sauce, and today I really wanted to be joined by my fiance Kid or Josh, but the way our schedules have been working out, it just hasn't happened. So I'm gonna go ahead and tackle this video by myself because today we want to share the things that we've learned through hiking as a couple. For context, we met about 1,600 miles into hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. We each started separately and met in Burning, California, and then we ended up hiking the Continental Divide Trail together in 2022. And these are some tips for through hiking as a couple that we have picked up along the way. Obviously, every couple is different and what works for us might not work for you. So feel free to use what works for you and forget what doesn't. My first tip is one that I think is especially dependent on the type of couple that you are. It might be a little controversial to some, but that tip is to actually not share gear. I've definitely seen lots of couples who do this successfully, but for us, we are way better off not sharing anything. Maybe it's because we were already doing this when we met on the PCT, but it's just really what works best for us. Part of the reason is that Kid is much faster than me, and we don't always necessarily want to hike side by side. I think a lot of the joy that both of us get from through hiking is sort of that independence aspect. So we're not always spending every single day together, like hiking single file in a line, and not having to worry about who has what gear and whether or not we're gonna meet up perfectly at meal times and stuff has reduced a lot of stress for us and freed us up to hike the hike that we want to hike. It's also meant that we've inadvertently been more prepared for certain situations that we didn't anticipate. We do sleep in the same tent when we're together, which on the CDT was my Z-Pax duplex. And Josh typically carried the duplex with him and I would carry his Plexamid. That way, if we ever got separated or if we were purposely sleeping separately, we each had a tent that we could use and didn't have to worry about bad weather or not finding each other at the end of the day, because that did happen on occasion. Sometimes we plan that, like I said, and sometimes it happens unexpectedly. There was a time when we were just outside of Yellowstone on the CDT and we got just torrentially downpoured on and I was already a little bit behind Josh. I took shelter under a tree for a while so I wouldn't get completely soaked through, and he was way ahead of me. And by the time the sun was starting to set, I knew that I had like a 3-mile climb if I was gonna catch up to him. So I just texted him on the Garmin and I was like, I'm good, I'm camping at the bottom of the climb. I'll see you in the morning, just wait for me there. So luckily I had all of my stuff and I could just camp by myself that night. Sometimes Josh also wanted to bust out a really big day into town. So we might've been, for me, what would be 2 days away from town, and he would decide to wake up really early and go into town early. He just loves that kind of challenge, and I'm content just hiking 20, 25 miles and then doing the remaining mileage into town the next morning. And so those were other times where it was nice for us to have separate tents. Also, each of our stoves broke at certain points on the CDT, so it was really nice to have a sort of accidental backup in each other's stove. So I guess we kind of did share stoves for a little while, but it was out of the fact that one of our stoves was broken. Whereas if you're a couple sharing one stove and your stove breaks, then you're kind of SOL. But again, this is a very personal decision, and we also hiked with a couple that did share a tent, and it works for some people. Although I will say they did have 1 or 2 scares where they got separated on trail, especially on a trail like the CDT where there's all these sometimes really small alternates. You don't know if someone might have passed you without you realizing. Maybe they took a little bit of like a 1/10 of a mile alternate, and if they passed you on that and you think they're behind you, it can get really confusing trying to figure out whether you need to wait for them or whether you need to catch them. And so for that reason, again, it's just nice to have your own gear, at the very least, like a tarp or something. And then again, that's also why I really love having the Garmin, so we can kind of text back and forth to each other in a worst case scenario. My second tip for through hiking as a couple is to have hard conversations before you leave. I'm a bit of a prepper, I guess, when it comes to these kind of things, but this was something that made me a lot more comfortable going into our CDT through hike as a couple. And I wanted to have like a clear understanding of a few things before we started the through hike. I really wanted to know what we expected of each other in certain situations, so we had at least talked about it before, the sometimes stressful things that come up on through hikes came up. For example, I wanted to know what we would do if one of us got injured. For example, there's a difference between an injury that takes an extra day in town and an injury that is potentially through hike ending. Would we want the other person to continue, or would we want them to come off trail with us? I knew the answer to that question, and I figured that both of us would want the other person to keep going, but it's still good to have that conversation beforehand, I think, so that you're ready when that's a very emotional thing happens. I also wanted to know what we wanted to do if one of us wanted to quit, how we preferred being helped through that situation, etc. We also talked about the fact that we didn't need to hike together all day, every day, as I mentioned before. It was helpful to know what each person expected of hiking as a couple before we left. My third tip for hiking as a couple is something that I sort of already mentioned, but that's to carry a satellite communication device, and preferably one that you can text with. So there are the kind that you can just send like the SOS button and that's it, but I think I would recommend for couples specifically to carry ones that you can do the custom text messages on. I sort of coerced Kid into this, but I think he was also very grateful to have it once we were on trail. I knew that Josh worries a little bit when I don't show up as soon as he might be expecting. We had a preview of this once when we went backpacking together in Colorado on the 4-Pass Loop. I had invited some friends who hadn't really backpacked before, and he went on ahead to the lake to get us a camp spot, and it took us a little bit longer than we expected, and it was starting to become nightfall, and he was extremely worried about me, which is very sweet, but it would have saved him a lot of headache if I could have just texted him and been like, hey, I know it's taking a while, but we're all good. He was sort of contemplating coming back out and finding me. Luckily, people talked him out of that, and me and my friend did end up showing up right as the sun was setting, and luckily people offered to share a tent with him and stuff, but I was carrying the tent. Again, that was a lesson we learned from that trip, is it might be better if each of us carried our own tent. But yeah, overall, it's really helped us in a lot of different situations, being able to just update each other quickly. One thing to keep in mind though is it's not going to be as quick always as regular text messages, and the person does have to be checking for their messages, etc. There's caveats that go with this, as with everything, but just being able to check in with each other was a big help for us in many instances on the CDT. There were quite a few times where we got unexpectedly separated, and it was much better for both of us to be able to text, hey, I'm not gonna make it tonight, but I'm okay, I'll see you in the morning, rather than me either trying, it was always me usually that was behind, so rather than me trying to hike through the night and catch up, or him being worried all night, it was just a simple message that could put both of us at ease. My fourth tip for through hiking as a couple is that if you want a trail family, it might take a little bit more effort than when you're hiking solo. Something that I think both of us really realized on the CDT is that through hiking as a couple made it a little bit harder to stick with a set trail family. It's a little bit easier to not go in on hotel rooms with people and sort of just do your own thing because you have that built-in partner with you. And that can sometimes create a little bit of separation from a group that might otherwise form naturally. We did end up having lots of amazing people that we hiked with and eventually did end up with a trail family, but I think you have to be a little bit more intentional about creating those connections as a couple. My fifth tip for through hiking as a couple is to understand that some things will no longer be sacred. And what I mean by that is if you're a couple who has never through hiked or backpacked together before, just understand that your partner is going to see it all. There's not really going to be a lot that you can hide. There's not a lot of mystery to maintain when you're doing something as rigorous and as sometimes disgusting as a through hike. Personally, I prefer this kind of connection. I think it's part of what brought Ken and I so close so early on the PCT, but just in case you're hoping to maintain some sort of facade around this person that you're going to be through hiking with, just understand that you're gonna be in close quarters. You're both gonna smell really bad. You're gonna get really dirty. You're gonna have your hardest days. Then they're gonna see all of it. So just be ready for that. The next tip that I have for through hiking as a couple is something that I learned on a Backpacker Radio podcast from Lauren and Henry de la Vega. I believe their trail names are Rooster and Woodchuck. And they talked about their trail vows for through hiking as a couple, and Kid and I took inspiration from that and created trail vows for each other. So for example, one of the things that I vowed to Josh was to blow up his sleeping pad at least 10 times, and he could invoke that whenever he needed. So if he had a really long and rough day, he could say, hey Sauce, can you please blow up my sleeping pad for me? And I would do that for him, no questions asked. And he had ones for me, like I believe one of the ones he had for me was that he would filter my water if I asked him to. Obviously that comes in really clutch sometimes. If one of you is feeling really low energy on a day, you can definitely take advantage of the fact that you are doing this with someone else. So shout out to Lauren and Henry for that awesome tip. We definitely implemented that on our CDT through hike, and it was a lot of fun, and I think brought us closer as a couple as well. My final tip for through hiking as a couple is to find a way to have your own individual journeys as well. I mentioned this before, but something that I really value out of through hiking is sort of the freedom and the sense of independence that I gain from it, which obviously can be harder to maintain when you're through hiking with somebody else. It's important for us to kind of figure out what we wanted out of the through hike before we left and make sure we were giving each other the space place to do that while we were on the CDT. I hope if you're thinking about through hiking or backpacking as a couple, you find some of these tips helpful. Feel free to leave some tips of your own in the comments if you have experience through hiking as a couple, and please feel free to leave any questions you have for us as well. Thanks for watching. Bye.